Hi, Julie Frumin. Good morning. How are you?
Doing well. How are you, Hilary?
Good, good. Thank you for being willing to talk with me today. With the college advisor, I'm Hilary Leffitz, and even though my focus is on college and helping kids find their right fit and all of that, I know that there are so many things that play into their lives. And having three kids of my own, I see how social media also comes into play with that. But that's going to be our topic today, of dealing with social media and teenagers and college students. But before then, I thought maybe you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit. I know you're a therapist, a licensed marriage and family therapist. But I also wanted to find out, I know you really do a lot of focus in the area of social media. So maybe you could explain to us how you got there.
Sure. Yeah, and thank you for having me. So I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm in private practice in Westlake, and I've been doing that for almost a decade. And I'm also the mental wellness specialist at the Wellness Center at the Four Seasons Center for Health and Wellbeing. It's such a mouthful.
Yes.
But basically, what I found, I've been doing that for 6 years. Um, I started working with teenagers in 2008 before most teens had smartphones. So I've really had an up close seat to see how life has changed for
Yeah.
young people since that time. And so, what I've noticed though over the last even pre COVID, even 5 to maybe 7 years, is that use of devices as they become more exciting and they've been able to do more. It's just increased with all people of all ages. And
Yeah.
so I have been working in my practice and at the hotel with, older people too, like of all ages, talking with people about their device habits because it was unavoidable when we talked about their well-being. It wasn't something I came in thinking, oh, this is what I'm going to focus on. It was something that I was confronted with hour after hour after hour.
Really?
I didn't start considering really doing something more about that until a year ago when I was walking my kids to school and a fellow parent just sort of casually asked me if I was getting my son a phone this year. And so
Uh-huh.
at the time he was 9. Now obviously he's 10. And it floored me because I didn't realize that we were already there yet. I thought, wow, this is way, knowing what I know and what I've been working on with individuals in the room as a therapist, I just was really surprised that it had already started with kids as young as 9 years old. So that's when I started doing some more advocacy work and some workshops for parents and for young people about doing technology more intentionally and sort of slowing it down a bit.
And I'm just curious before we get more into that, but had your son even brought it up yet about wanting a phone? No.
No, never. He has one friend with a phone I mean, he's got more than that that are more acquaintances, but of his close friends, he has one with a phone. But it's not something that he's been saying, "Oh, I need that," or
Right.
um, you know, he's more so into like as is typical for boys, more interested in playing more video games.
Right.
And so that, boys tend to lean more toward gaming, where girls really lean more heavily into social media. And so we can talk more about that later
Yeah, I
too.
was going to say, and maybe in some ways we almost need to do two separate talks, one on the boys, because I know I've seen a lot of boys that I work with who are very much into gaming and the
Yes.
issues that come with it, and girls and all of that. But really, having been a therapist, and my vantage point, when working with kids is really their mental health. Because if you aren't in a good place in your life mentally, I feel like nothing else comes together the way ideally it should. And they've talked in the media excessively about, that we're having a mental health crisis in our communities. It's really about teens. I know there's always a lot of blame on social media though I don't think that's the only thing that's impacting them. I think there's a lot of other issues in the world that affect them, but maybe you can explain too just how the use of social media and being on your smartphone affects them developmentally and why that may lead to mental health issues.
So I hear you that it's definitely there's a lot that goes on in the world, and yet what we see, there's been a lot going on in the world forever. And so, there's a lot of really disturbing, news content that we see more of today. But if you think about over the span of history, we've had big wars and the depression, the 1930s, and then even in 2008, the recession and, lots of people losing their jobs. We
Right.
didn't have the same mental health problems with teenagers until 2012. And 2012 is the year that the majority of Americans had a smartphone, and the year that the majority of teenagers were using social media daily, that it became something that they felt compelled to do. It wasn't really an option anymore to not use it because of the connection piece. If
Sure.
everybody else is using it, then they do as well. And that's when it's like a hockey stick from more like a typical statistical chart into just through the roof with increased depression, anxiety, and
Right.
then self-harm and completed suicides as well. So, but I don't think that we can say, oh, if we just took away social media, that's not my goal. That's not anybody's goal to just say, oh, it's not going to exist anymore. It's here to stay. I don't think even if we had a magic wand and took away social media, that the world would be fixed for teens. And part of what's happened really is that over the years, even pre-smartphone, parents became more fearful of letting their kids out to play. So
Sure.
even starting at a younger age. So kids became more isolated in their homes more than they were in, let's say, the 1940s and 50s. So it started at the 80s and 90s. Kids started doing more extracurricular activities that were structured and less sort of free play out in neighborhoods. And so as that change started to happen, and what we've seen also too, then when technology became so amazingly readily available and entertaining, it made it easier to keep kids at home with either games or social media or
Sure.
any of the amazing other types of media that we have access to, like Netflix that streams one episode after the other. Entertainment just got way better. And so it became really a lot easier to keep kids indoors in their homes. So what we've seen since 2012 and even a little bit before was a decline in face-to-face interaction with kids. And that is imperative for their mental health. They also are sleeping less than ever. So that is tied to smartphones and is tied to entertainment as the use of technology and media in general. So again, not just social media, increases. And I think even as adults, we're guilty of this. Like we've Netflixed past the point of thinking, oh, I'm going to go to bed at this time. But then the next episode is just right there, as opposed to when we were growing up, we had to wait a week for it. So
Yes.
as sleep, if you look at it across the board in most Western countries, sleep time, sleep quantity and quality have also declined, which is also really bad for mental health. So there's all these little like other things going on. But when people point to, oh, we think it's probably global warming, or we think it's, the school shootings or like the political divide, usually teenagers aren't depressed or harming themselves because of big national events. They harm themselves when they feel lonely, isolated, and hopeless.
Yeah. The difference that I find, at least my observations with my own children who are in their early 20s now, but when I was growing up, the only access I had to news was watching a TV or looking at a newspaper. Now, if your 9-year-old or 15-year-old or 20-something-year-old has a smartphone, which I would be safe to say, a majority do, maybe not the little ones, but they'll go on to some sort of social media and things pop up even that they're not looking for. So as a parent, when I was growing up, or even when my kids were growing up and they didn't have access to that, is I could turn off the TV. I could hide the newspaper. And if I needed to explain it to them, I could explain it to them in a way that was developmentally appropriate. Now they get on a phone and they see awful images. And so that's where I think it seeps into their brain in a different way. So it's what they're seeing that affects them on just the world not feeling safe is kind of what I'm getting at.
Absolutely. And you're so right that the images that they see are not consensual. So
Yeah,
people will say, oh, I love to look at puppy videos and that makes me feel
sure.
really good. And I'm, who's to say that that's a bad thing? It's definitely not a bad thing. But what we see, and this is on YouTube as well, YouTube is a type of social
Sure.
media now, is that the next thing, we don't know what that next thing is. And it is psychologically damaging and disturbing
Mm,
to go from puppy videos to war images.
sure.
Or, that is a common thing that happens. And, with very little control, as you said, as a parent, if you have access, which we don't, this isn't absolutely is not about protection of, our kids can't know anything about the world. Like I
Right.
am absolutely not for that. I believe in talking with our kids about the world and about, complicated ideas and big things. I think that they should hear it from us, and we should give them a space to talk through, a lot of really sort of emotional and difficult things. But I want to do that. I don't want some stranger from I don't know where in the world explaining something or showing something to my kids in a way that is, you know, potentially not appropriate, but potentially also just like really disturbing because adults are disturbed by this stuff too.
Yeah,
So
100%. So do you have any magic answers? I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Because I know there aren't, but I know there's a lot of, especially when we've talked about girls being on social media, and I don't care what platform they're on, or even just the communication that they have with each other. I forget the name of the one where you can send something and then it disappears. Snapchat, thank you. I'm dating myself. But you know, when kids are little, like that was a perfect example of talking about not giving your son a smartphone at 9. By the time you hit middle school, definitely high school, I think you'd be hard to find a kid who doesn't have one. And I think, and then you go off to college and you aren't with your kids day in and day out. And so, as a parent, what kind of messages can you send your kids? How can you educate them and teach them about the effects that this is all having with on them, and how to control it? Because you're right, we're not going to take it away. We're way beyond that. It's part of our society now. I find myself going down the rabbit hole on it sometimes too.
yeah.
And it's a trap. It's hard.
It is. And I know that a lot of your audience also has naturally older children. So
Sure.
but they might also have some younger children in their mix as well.
Right.
All experts across the board in medicine, psychology, government, and the tech sector all recommend just delaying everything as long as you can. So
Sure.
joining with families to delay, to delay the first smartphone, to delay social media, to delay, having access to that device in their bedroom overnight. We know that, again, that disturbs their sleep. And especially if you're looking at psychologically disturbing things before bed, it's not conducive to good sleep. But one of the things that you can do when your kid already has the phone and has social media is you've got to own it you've got to sort of model what you want to see.
Right.
We as adults are addicted to media. So we have to really sort of pull back as a family, and we can think about how much time do we want to devote to entertainment and media? How much, like, what is the vibe of this home and our relationship to media? And how can we create together sort of a family philosophy around how we use this as a tool and not as the glasses that we're seeing through all of the time? And so
Sure.
some simple like rules that people put in place, and everybody's are going to be different, but there are some simple ones we can do, like everybody putting their phone in a charging station at a certain time of the night, like maybe an hour before bed, and then training yourself along with your teens. You can't expect your older teenager to do something you're not willing to do. So, get off your phone. It's just like, that's not going to work with the
Right,
17.
while you're looking at it, get off your phone.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. So we
No,
have
it
to sort
doesn't.
of, like, my ultimate goal is about changing habits in general so that we live more in harmony with these devices, and so that we're not, what I hear about often is like, oh, I hate my husband's phone use, or I hate my kids. Everybody hates other people's phone use, right? And so it's like, well, we need to all pull back and say, okay, when should we not have them on us? Because we shouldn't have them on us every single second of every single day. And if we can create some different norms around our home, our kids are going to feel different because they'll get respite from it. And of course, we can't predict what's going to happen when they go to college, but we do try within all of our power to set them up for success in a way that once they're gone, that they remember not just this piece, all pieces of how we've raised them and how our home felt, so that they can go, okay, I'm feeling dysregulated, or I'm feeling out of control. What was it that we did at home? Or like, yo, mom would tell me, go lay down, or go, read a book, or she would tell me to, whatever it is, that's all we really have, is to set them up at home with ways of being that are healthy and more balanced than what we've done. And I'm not going to blame any parents for not being balanced, because
It's hard.
it's hard. And we also lived through COVID. And so if your children is like, in high school right now, they've gone through it during those preteen years
Sure,
during
sure.
COVID. So it's just sort of, maybe at this point, knowing what we know now, pulling back and reevaluating.
Yeah. Yeah. And would you tell, as kids go off to college? I know I've had kids tell me, maybe when they were struggling in college and they would look on social media and it looks like everybody else is having this great time and they're not. And how do you help them understand that? Because it seems so real.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is, and I talk about this a lot with my clients, because I see a lot of young people, and as they go to college, I will retain that relationship with them at times and check in. Um, and our brains are comparison making machines. So I have clients all the time say, how can you help me to stop comparing myself when I go on social media? And I can't, because I can't change I can't give you a different brain. Like, our brains are always trying to make sense of the world. And it is a natural part of how we evolved over time. We're
Mm,
always looking around to try and see where we fit in the social structure. Am I
right.
better? Am I worse? Am I, stronger? Am I weaker? That's how our brains work. And so knowing that, then we can tell ourselves before we get on, if we're going to, choosing to get on social media, to say, okay, I'm going to do this for a minute or two. I'm going to like scroll through, check a couple things for a short amount of time, and then check myself and see how I feel. It's really this infinite scrolling pattern that people can get into, because it
Sure.
is really addictive. It's a new stimuli every 20 seconds. It's a new hit of dopamine. It's hard to pull out of it, even when you really, really want to. And so, tech companies have some work to do on their ends, because that can be fixed on their end, because we aren't wired to be able to control it, especially with a fully developed prefrontal cortex. So it's
Sure.
really difficult, but kids can, and teens can, and young adults do their best to be aware of how they feel when they get off. You could keep a little journal over about a week and say, write down how do I feel now? And that is kind of, that's eye-opening for a lot of people to be like, oh, I feel bad about myself 100% of the time. I went on there to check and see if there was an event today with my sorority or whatever, but then I spent this much more time than I intended to, and I ended up feeling bad. And that teaches you something. And so then you can try, we can't really set the limits on them. They need to figure out what they are for themselves.
Right, right. And that's the trial and error because I would imagine too, it affects your ability to manage time. All of a sudden, you've been on an hour when you should have been studying for an exam the next day, whatever it is. But I mean, are there simple tools I think of just, setting an alarm, giving yourself 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is, and hopefully having the strength to listen to that alarm. Maybe it's like your mother's voice somewhere in the back of your head saying, okay, time's up, you got to get off.
Yeah. I find for myself, even with a fully developed brain, at least I think so, fully developed, I have to put it in a drawer or put it in another room.
Okay.
I can't have it next to me. And I've seen this with clients I've worked with of all ages. I even have a fully grown client in his mid-30s who puts it in a case safe. So it's one of those timed safes, and they've been selling like crazy because
Really?
he works from home, and he's like, I cannot get hard work like that, high cognitive work done with my phone not being locked in a safe. And
Wow.
what is college and studying if not of high cognitive load, right? Like it's intense stuff. They're reading really dense text. They're trying to think in new complex ways. I just think it's really best. And it's hard because they're like, oh, it's my music, or oh,
Yeah.
whatever. I'm like, well, get a little record player or get a CD player, or like, put the music on and then put it in the drawer and turn off all your notifications, but don't be able to see it, because when you can see it,
Uh,
it like really calls upon our like, our old ancestors, because we lived in these tribes in which, if somebody needed you in your tribe, you needed to jump for them and go get them and help them. It feels like that. It plays upon that. It's like, oh, they need me. They're reaching out to me. They want to talk to me,
right.
or they're saying something about me. It's like, it's socially validating perhaps, and I need to see that. So it's really impossible to say that they can have it there, face up on their desk. Um, you know, it's just almost impossible not to get pulled into that. And then of course you can end up going down a rabbit hole. So for time management, I always tell my clients to put it to where they can't see it. It's amazing what that will do. It's just so simple. Just put it in a drawer.
Out of sight, out of mind,
Totally.
those old sayings hold some truth. So, in sort of parting, it sounds like maybe a good gift to give a college kid is maybe a little safe or
Maybe I haven't thought of that until you said that, but I think setting them up for success in the best way you can when they're in your home, showing them that it's hard for you, normalizing, like I want to put my phone away so much, but I've got this thing from work that's potentially coming through, and
right,
normalizing how you're going to work through that, because it's part of life. And especially as they get older. And then talking with them too about how it's going for
right,
them, and especially if they're neurodivergent, if you've got a kid with ADHD, you've got to really step it up and say, listen, we want you to have the best outcomes possible.
sure,
And we know that this is the greatest distraction device in all of history. And so for a myriad of reasons. And with that being said, what can we do? What do you think? What can we try? And ideally trying it at home, in the last year or two of high school,
right,
and seeing what helps for study habits. Because I know that when I see clients, especially, when I'm seeing someone pretty frequently throughout their high school years, this is a really like frustrating thing when they want to be a good student and they want to do well, and they find they just can't stop looking at their phone.
yeah,
They're like, gosh, I went to school all day, and then I went and did my sport after school for a couple of hours, and then I came home and I had this many hours before I'm supposed to go to bed. And
right.
all of a sudden I look up and it's bedtime. and I've been on it the whole time. And so we need to help our kids to not have that experience, because then they're really shaming. They feel like they are the only ones. They feel like, what's wrong with me? They all think they have ADHD, when in reality,
Right.
they don't all have
No,
ADHD.
they don't. They don't.
No. So, and some do, but like most people don't. And so we need to figure out, how can we help them to set them up for more success, and so that they don't beat themselves up so much, and to say, hey, listen, this isn't your fault. This is the way your brain is wired. This is very distracting. Adults struggle. Let's come up with some systems to help you that you can take with you as you head off to college.
And I really like that. It's really empowering them and guiding them and helping them explore tools that are going to work for them, because what might work for you or for me, they're a lot younger. And if they can come up with it, they're more likely to be successful
Absolutely.
in being successful. I mean, truly,
Yeah.
truly. So I think that's awesome. And it teaches them how to problem solve,
Yeah.
which is something they're going to need throughout the rest of their lives. So thank you so much, Julie,
Well,
for
thank you.
talking about this with us today. And maybe at some point, as new things come out, we can talk about it again. So thank you.
I'd love that. Thank you for having me.